with them. But as you can see, Arizona is really falling behind in terms of being a leader in this front. So with that, and only a couple minutes over, I want to say thanks. You can follow up by going to our website, and I'll just turn off the video or show the sharing so I can answer some of your questions. So thank you. Let's see, so trying to catch up here. When my garden zucchini grow larger, I would argue the flavor becomes diluted as compared to a smaller zucchini, okay? Do the larger basil leaves taste blander than the smaller? What are your nutritional science connections? From the illustrious Kevin Bonine, good question. So one of my new graduate students in geography came from a food science major in Wisconsin, and that's exactly why we invited her to be a part of this, is to track that food science aspect of this. In terms of flavor, in terms of nutrient quality, there's a few reasons you might expect there to be differences in nutritional quality. One is those plants are less stressed under the agrivoltaics, and so you're not going to taste their stress compounds that they put out to prevent insect damage. You're right about the blander. So we have noticed that the seasonality of the flavor varies quite a bit in sun-grown or traditional basil. Like right now, it's so concentrated, it's super pungent because it's the end of the season. But also right now, you can still have basil. That picture was actually from 2 weeks ago. We're harvesting basil, like pounds of basil per day out of this site. And it's really buttery. It tastes like a butter lettuce almost. But I literally just overnighted 5 pounds of basil to the first ever Agrivoltaics solar feast. It's part of a solar conference in Minnesota with that Fresh Energy group. And he was going to give them bags of basil from the control and the Agrivoltaics and let the chefs decide. So I'll let you know about that one, Kevin. Let's see, are you talking with the natural? I'm not sure what that is.
It's the Natural Resources Conservation Services. Those are areas within the state of Arizona, actually nationally, but these are groups that are really looking for additional ways to increase productivity.
No, I have not yet. So thanks for that tip. I'm writing.
Sure. They're districts. Yeah, that's a good idea. Greg, there was also a question of how to harvest these crops if this were adopted at larger scales.
Great question. So that was part of a USDA project we put in, was like, can this happen in places like Illinois where you have ginormous combines that go through? That proposal was not funded, but that was the part of it, was to search that out there. Actually, all of the spacing on the solar arrays that we have in Colorado are spaced such that you could drive a tractor through there. So most of the times there's been developments. I'm using my phone now. So solar arrays sit at, like let's say a 32-degree angle, but the ones that track the sun are pretty dynamic in terms of their moving ability. And so think about like rows of these. You don't really need to have the space between the entire solar array if you can just get the solar panels out of the way. And so if you space your solar panel mast at 20 feet, then you're out of the way for most of that production. And so most solar panels and the tracking systems can now go to about 80 degrees. So they're nearly perpendicular to the soil. And so actually everything at the Colorado site is tractor-based management and harvesting. But to come back to the question about microgrids, a lot of the food production in those situations is still hand harvest. And so I can say unequivocally, hand harvest is doing really well. And the next question is, how do we connect with the right industries that match the machinery and the food responses to make this scalable for them? It won't work for everybody. The question is finding out where it will work.
So there's a question here about the fate of rainfall from Gary Woodard. Do you capture the rain from the panels and direct it to the plants?
Awesome. Wow. So there's lots of people I should be collaborating with on new proposals. So yes. So Gary, we do and we don't. At the biosphere, we do not harvest the water. At the Rincon University high site, we do. So it's a mishmash of trying different things at this early stage. So we do harvest all the water at the Rincon site, and it's connected to a series of 3,000-gallon, water storage containers, and we use that water. So it's more of a closed loop over there. One of the aspects of our project at Jack's Solar Garden in Colorado is to work on water capture. And so exactly what you're saying. We're going to either do it passively through creating of basins so that during those storms, because I'll just say, even at the University of Arizona, there are people who have created cloud forecast models where based on current weather, they imagine when the clouds are going to come in. And that helps the companies know how to pivot between solar and non-solar energy sources. So we're using those to drive some of the tracker systems. So if there's a high chance of cloud production producing rain, you go more into that, near perpendicular format, so you let the water flow through, so you're not blocking the rain. So there's several ways to play with that water capture.
Back to Jeffrey Famey, I think you make a compelling case for when this goes well, but what about when it is done less well? Big patches of weeds and unwanted wildlife.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the primary concern of most of the utilities. So we were really close to having NextEra Energy, a big solar company in our region, allow us to have access to their Wilmot Road site, which is a really large installation down near I-10 Wilmot. But at the last minute, they got too nervous and pulled out of that. They ended up giving us, a quarter acre of solar to go create a new installation somewhere else. So we're looking at either Biosphere or the Campbell Road Farms. But for that very reason, they were spooked. They said, well, what if suddenly we have lots of snakes? What if things grow too high? And part of the challenge is because things have not gone well in the past. If you talk to Tucson Electric Power, which is super hesitant to try, well, let's just say almost anything new, they definitely are nervous about this because at one point they did revegetate, but they used that blue slurry. You see on the roadways, it's just a mishmash of seeds, not even native seeds. And so they got really tall plants, which meant suddenly lots more maintenance for them. And so they're very nervous about trying something new. And so it's all about small scale things that you can show them. This isn't a disaster, let's try it bigger.
Carletta Chief is saying the Navajo people living in the Peabody leasehold area were given a proposal to turn all of their reclaimed lands into solar farms, and they declined due to the desire to keep the land for grazing.
Yeah, so I think one very unexplored avenue is solar plus agriculture plus grazing. And Diana Gitu, who's on here, is potentially looking into this with us. We know that there are lots of grasses that are shade tolerant. If you're a grass nerd like Jeff and I, and you go to say the Santa Ritas, there's grasses everywhere. Those aren't the same grasses out in the sun versus out under a mesquite tree. And so I think if we are really intentional about our rangeland management, we can create mixes that are native to this region or regionalized grasses that are good for grazing production, but are also semi-shade tolerant. And so that is where I think it comes to a more economic question. What about the cost of adding the steel to put in this grazing? Well, I think that's where the economics is more than that initial cost of upfront steel, because instead of transitioning to solar and always being solar, by elevating that steel, you keep that grazing potential, for the entire 30-year lifespan of that solar installation. So I think that looking at grazing under PV is got enormous potential out west, where we put so much of our public lands into grazing. Their entire, I'll just say, leave you with this in case it's the last one, their entire company's bubbling up around this, and they're constantly saying, why do you give away all this information for free? Which is sometimes hard to answer when my office is in a shed. But their entire grazing companies, there's a company called Agrivoltaics Solutions that just looks at grazing under PV. And what they're doing is they're taking on the operational and maintenance costs for large scale solar arrays. And they're basically sheep herders that migrate around to different PV pastures. And that's the entire business model, is there's lots of PV going in around the Northeast. They need to maintain that grass. It's cheaper to have sheep there than to have tractors coming through, and it's less disruptive. Can the height of the panels be adjusted for different crops? That's technically possible, but very complicated, we found. But at that Jack's Solar Garden site, we convinced him to let us test that. And so about 2/3 of his site is at 6-foot high panels, and 1/3 of it is at 8-foot high panels. So we can see what are the potential, any additional benefits of investing in that extra steel to go higher.
Bruce Plank asked, would you consider participating in the annual solar potluck sponsored by Citizens for Solar at Catalina State Park? Then you could have solar grown food cooked in solar ovens.
100% yes. So along with all this basil, I sent about $300 worth of chiltepines for them to play with up there for that Agrivoltaics feast that they're having this weekend in Minnesota. So absolutely. And maybe this is where we end. So another question about the economics is, there's things are more costly when they're organic because of all the additional costs that go into it, but because also we're willing to pay more for what was ethically behind that. And Cliff Bar, the Cliff family farm who produces Cliff Bars, has put in pollinator habitat around their factory up in Idaho. And now from that apiary, they're selling Cliff brand honey. And so for a jar of honey that's, I don't know, a jar of honey like this size is about $4 at Sprouts. It's $9 when you buy solar shaded brand products. And so there's all this new potential for this. And that's part of what Fresh Energy is also working on, is a new certification, because you see they have these scorecards, but also a scorecard for solar shaded or solar produced food products. But absolutely, Bruce, I look forward to looking that up, and we'll definitely be there. We're growing fava beans, chickpeas, onions, and oregano as part of our Middle Eastern winter to get ready for that Arava desert site. So we'll have lots to play with by then.
Okay, I think we may have run out of questions. This was absolutely tremendous. There's a whole lot of comments here of just thank you, and can't wait to start telling people about it. So
thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Greg, what is the best written explanation that you have if people want to pass around a link or something to their classes? Or
I can send it to you.
Okay, we can send it out to the EBC list. And
we also have, if you don't want to read the book, you can watch the movie. We have a recent 6-minute video that was produced by Now This that connects with the farmer side and the food side really well. So that's another great resource.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
That is great.
Thanks for all the questions.
If this grant goes forward, we're going to have a whole lot more work to do, but further fleshing things out.
Yes. Great.
Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you the next first Friday in November. It is 2nd. Is it November 2nd, Robert?
In 2 weeks, though, we're first going to have Jim Beiser talk.
Oh, right. We've got the extra one.
I'll send, at the same time as I send the Atlantic link, I'll send you a reminder about Jim's thing. That's 2 weeks from today. Yeah.
Okay,
nice.
Jim Beiser is going to do a special talk in between our monthly talks. Okay.
Right.
Great to see you. Thank you so much, Greg. That was really fantastic.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.